At the end of the day, aren't we all idiots with a computer? Aren't we all?
Well, stupid is as stupid does,
right.
to quote a wise philosopher. Welcome to This Catholic Life. Conversations about life's ups and downs, big and small, how we deal with every situation imaginable, whatever life throws at us, but still manage to be sensible, practical, and joyful. Today's show is the internet and Christianity, a conversation about the internet, what it means for Catholics, and for our relationship with God and each other. I'm your host, Peter Holmes, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Rian Galliott, artist, resident geek, and my co-host today.
Yes, hello Peter, hello everyone.
And welcoming back, hardly a guest, because he's now becoming an old favourite, Matthew Tan, lecturer, academic, author, and editor at Awkward Asian Theologian, the blog.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Matthew. Before we get started, just a reminder that if you like the show, you should subscribe to our podcast on your podcast app, and that way you won't miss a single show. Let's get right into today's topic, the internet and Christianity. Now, the reason we have Matthew here today is that he wrote an intriguing essay some time ago. When was it, Matthew?
Oh, I think that may have been a few years back. I think it was something like 3 years ago. Maybe even more.
I think it would be more, actually, because I've been thinking about it for longer than that. And usually I don't think unless I've read something about it. So you made this claim, or the title of the essay, was it In the Internet as a Form of Prayer?
That's correct.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea grabbed my attention initially. So how could the internet be a form of prayer? So maybe if you open up with that.
Sure. What I basically identified in that presentation was to draw parallels between how an observer would look at the way an internet user would use the internet,
right,
and how a person enters into a state of prayer.
So if you looked at a person sitting on the internet and you looked at a person praying, there are similarities.
There would be similarities not only in what we actually see on the outside, but also what is going on with the user and the person at prayer on the inside.
Why they're doing it.
And why they're doing it. Yeah. So one of the things that I talked about specifically was the question of decentering. And in decentering, a person who is at prayer is actually not he's not his own person when a person is at prayer. He is directing his attention to God, but more than that, I drew on a book written by a Carmelite nun on spirituality. Her name was Ruth Burrows. She wrote this book called To Believe in Jesus.
Right.
In one of her writings, she says that prayer is actually not something that you do. Prayer is something that Jesus does through you. And so
we
prayer
do pray through Jesus, don't we?
We do.
Yeah.
We do. And the Spirit is what gives us the words when our words fail. So when there's a very profound Trinitarian, communal act when a person is at prayer. Right, you are entering into the body of Christ.
Yep.
You are drawn into the body of Christ by the power of the Holy Spirit, and you are directing what the Holy Spirit says through you back to the Father.
And you're joining Christ's prayers.
And you're joining Christ's prayers.
So we literally pray in the name of Jesus Christ. So we're joining his prayer and his mission.
Correct.
But how is that related to the internet?
This is related to the internet because the internet is actually a very profoundly, for the want of a better term, social activity.
Okay.
Because you need a lot of things to actually get on the internet.
Right.
We haven't got to the stage where we can actually get online on our own steam just yet. We still need a lot of infrastructure.
A device.
We need the services of various corporations and companies, such as power, such as Wi-Fi, ISPs and the like.
And all the technologies involved in 4G or whatever it is.
Correct. We also need the assistance of a whole range of administrators, group administrators, site administrators, in order to express ourselves online. So there's actually a very social dimension, right? Where you are not your own person. You actually need to rely on a lot of other persons in order for you to express yourself online. So before I even utter a word online, I am already moving out of myself and relying upon others.
And it's not just others, it's a bigger thing than all of us individually.
Absolutely.
So it's not just one person is the internet typing all the answers.
That's right.
You're tapping into something bigger than yourself.
Absolutely. That's right. So entry into the internet, at least at that at that level, has a lot of similarities to the processes that are taking place in prayer.
See, it's funny. I went a slightly different way when I thought about it, and maybe I think it came up in your paper. I think that the reasons you go to prayer are similar in some ways to the reasons you go to the internet. So, for example, you might go to, in a world before the internet, if you didn't understand something, you might pray, say, God, help me understand it. Or if you looked for answers for life's difficult questions, or you were worried about a particular ache in your back, and is it cancer? So you go to God. Or
it's usually not, by the way.
Or you're feeling, it's almost.
We need to make that clear.
Yes. Or you feel some way disconnected to the whole world, and you find consolation in prayer and God. We seem to go, for all those reasons now, we seem to go to the internet. So, Dr. Google, which is, as you said, quite disastrous, because I end up finding out that I've got 7 forms of horrible leprosy or something. And also I seem to go looking to the internet for my cure of loneliness, or the lack of knowledge, or wanting to understand, or trying to find meaning in life. There's some of those search engines where you type in what is the meaning of, and you see all the possible results come out, and you think, gosh, this is all the most asked questions on the internet. There seems to be all the questions that people might have put to God before the internet are now going to the internet.
Sure. In order to deal with the situation, we need to expand ourselves, whether it is in terms of our mental capacity, whether it is in terms of our reach, whether it is in terms of our own, subjectivity by recourse to reaching out to friends to form a community. We are motivated to expand ourselves, right, in order to meet the challenge that is before us. That is a very profoundly human experience, and we turn to technology, and as much as we turn to prayer to meet these challenges.
And also, it seems that technology actually ends up shaping. It's not just that we're looking for help for technology outside of ourselves to do the ordinary things. The fact that we've turned to technology has ended up shaping our ordinary life.
That's right.
So people are literally almost living for the next Instagram shot, or the Facebook, how this is going to look on Facebook, or Facebook events, and the connections, if you like, or whatever other internet things are going to happen. They seem to almost shape life by way of reaction to the internet. So the whole phenomenon, just to give an example, back when, it wasn't so long ago, but people were planking. Now, the most absurd idea of now, okay, it's a bit of fun, but honestly, the fact that people were doing it was a direct reaction to everyone's doing this at the moment, and I want to be part of the tribe kind of thing. Right. And I will do this, and people will look at me because I'm planking in this weird way or something.
No, that's right. There's actually a really interesting podcast I listened to called The Happiness Lab, and it was a psychologist looking into the various angles on what it means to be happy.
Right.
In one episode, this podcaster was looking at what the effect shared experiences have on the experience of any particular thing, whether it is pleasant or whether it is unpleasant. What the study found was that when an experience gets shared, the experience actually becomes more intense.
Okay.
The good effects are actually experienced more intensely. The bad effects happen to be worse when that same experience gets shared.
Right.
So the experience becomes more real to us. Right. So sharing has now become such an important part of our everyday experience.
So it's more than just a kind of a social validation. It's actually an intensification of the experience.
Correct. It's actually, as you say, it is a sort of socially constructed validation of the fact that you had this experience. If you had not shared it, it hadn't happened.
Well, it's like things on Reddit, for example. You share something and people can upvote it or downvote it to see, which one is truth. But there's also this understanding, we were saying before, that people look online for answers that they would have originally turned to God. But a lot of the time, people I've found don't check to see the validity of what they've come up with, or whether, how true it is. And so there's almost this blind faith The number one on there that I found to this answer, this question, is the truth.
It's usually if they agree with it, though. There's a confirmation bias there.
Yeah.
As in, this confirms what I already think, therefore I assume that it's true.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We just rely on something without verifying, its validity.
Yeah.
It says something about the way we actually have come to discern truth, which actually is not a new thing.
No.
The recently canonized Saint John Henry Newman actually had something to say about this, albeit obliquely, in his very famous essay, The Grammar of Assent. In The Grammar of Assent, Saint John Henry Newman sort of rejected this idea that whenever we decide whether something is true, what we do is that we scientifically verify every element of the claim, prove that is true to our satisfaction, and then accept something to be true. In actual fact, John Henry Newman said that we are predisposed to be believing creatures. We already, without going through that mental process, are already giving assent to any particular truth claim about the world.
Right.
So we are always oriented towards believing something to be true before we actually start verifying whether something is true.
And is that to do with the fact that we want it to be true, or it suits our purposes in this community to remain in this community that we accept that that's true?
It certainly accentuates it.
Right.
But what this particular bias, this confirmation bias that we are seeing on the net demonstrates, albeit to the nth degree, is the fact that before we are verifiers, we are believers.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is a beautiful leveling of the internet. So it actually levels out all sources. So where we used to have to rely on the local news service to decide what was important for us to understand, you can get access to almost anything. And so, for example, instead of me having to access church teachings through my local channels, I can now go straight to Vatican.com, if they ever update their webpage. But there's all kinds of ways I can get access to things, and the direct news sort of Twitter feeds and all these sorts of things are quite they've demonstrated their power in a number of revolutionary situations where there's the government's trying to suppress information and it's still coming out. It's not perfect, but it does seem to have leveled the field. Another way it's leveled is that where we used to rely very much on the ideas of critics. So I don't know if you're a Rotten Tomatoes fan, there's a website called Rotten Tomatoes who review movies, and there's other similar ones like it. But you get the critics' review and the people's review. So they're the people who actually watched it and as consumers. And more, it's becoming obvious that the critics are a whole different world to the average listener, and the average consumer. And you'll get someone who's an actual like a critic, and they're canning something. A 13%, I think, one of the shows got, and 99% from the audience. And that's a disconnect. Normally, we would have to come through the critics to get our understanding of something.
That's right.
It seems to have leveled out in that sense, but there's also the negative sense of it. So maybe if you can talk about the positive sense of access and the breadth that is there first.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that you're talking about there is that there's actually a removal of privileged gatekeepers.
Okay, yeah, good.
The gatekeepers have been sort of like knocked off their perch, so to speak.
Right.
But at the same time, that is not to say that we have removed the need for gatekeepers in general.
Or interpreters, at least.
That's right, because what we have done is not remove the gatekeepers or interpreters. We've just multiplied them.
That's right.
Right.
And also we've made it's almost like a Protestantization of information, because you've let me select who I want to be my gatekeeper.
Yet at the same time, the other interesting thing that demonstrates too is the fact that when we try to discern what is or is not good information, we are not simply doing this on our own. Yeah. We are doing this as members of a particular, the postmodern writers talk about this as an interpretive community.
Right.
Right. We are interpreting the whole barrage of information all around us by becoming members of a community that in turn filters that information and perceives that as either good, true, false or bad information. But what that interpretive community is not completely flattened out. Right. Every one of those communities has the French philosopher Jacques Derrida talks about the good role that what he calls an interpretive police actually play. And every one of these communities has effectively an interpretive police that checks the borders of what is good or bad interpretation.
Right. And what behavior is acceptable within this particular group.
Correct. And what the net has done is simply multiply the numbers of interpretive police exponentially.
I think that was where I was going with this. That while the walls have come down between us and the information, we can get to it. The walls have also come down between us and protecting us against unwanted commentaries or unwanted feedback. So it's possible, for example, to get absolutely smashed on the internet if you happen to, poke a certain anthill. If you happen to say use a particular catchphrase the wrong way or upset the wrong trigger, and then suddenly you can get pile-on effects where literally a young lady can make a Twitter comment before she take off and fly to South Africa. And when she lands, she finds out she's sacked and her entire life is ruined. She has to change her name because someone's misunderstood a sarcastic joke she told. And it's gone viral on Twitter and it's so much public heat, the company just doesn't want to borrow of it. So this kind of pile-on, which there's no barriers to that. There's no walls to stop that happening, if you like.
No, that's right. And what that demonstrates is two things, right? First is that just because the number of interpretive police have multiplied doesn't necessarily mean that there are now good or bad interpretations. It just means that there are many, many interpretations.
And in fact, the number of them can actually get quite vicious because mobs, generally speaking, are not as intelligent as the least intelligent person in them.
Correct. And the other thing that also demonstrates is that because there are no good or bad interpretations, the recourse to one's cognitive faculties, or to put it colloquially, the use of our reason to filter whether something is true or not is kind of subordinated to our recourse to emotions. We now have,
how does this make me feel? That's what's going to determine whether I listen to it.
Absolutely. And how I feel determines whether something is true or not, whether it's worthy of attention, and so on.
And even when I don't want to listen to something, there seems to be some people with perhaps, let's just say, a little too much time on their hands, the combox warriors. So that the instant, you say something they don't like, if you have any kind of a profile, there's this pile-on of just vitriol and hate. Because there's no consequences for me being nasty to someone, I just unleash. And if I can't get my own way immediately, then I just keep turning the hurt and the vitriol up until I get some sort of reaction.
That's right. What this kind of demonstrates is that the internet is actually not a neutral space at all.
Right.
It is actually a formative space. It is a space that forms our desires, it forms our emotional states, and it has an effect of transforming us into another person. This is another reason why I said that there are parallels between the internet and prayer.
So it changes me as a person to be on the internet. It changes
you as a person, right? Just as prayer changes me as a person.
Right. Sorry, Box, you had something to add?
I was just thinking, with having so many interpreters involved in the internet, I mean, doesn't that do away with particular criteria that we have in which to participate in conversations and things like that? That's why we find it difficult to judge good or bad information. Because,
so what's a good movie? Who decides what's a good movie? The critics had a criteria, and now people are judging it on other grounds.
I would put it a little bit differently. It's not so much that we have done away with particular criteria. It's just that, once again, we have multiplied the criteria by which we can judge whether something is good or true.
But in so doing, then we don't know which criteria to follow. So in a way, we have done away with it.
Well, what we have done away is a universally agreeable criteria. That's what we have done.
And this is the whole fake news thing, is that distinguishing between, because any idiot with a computer and a little bit of knowledge with Photoshop and a few other things can create almost anything. You're dealing with a situation where it takes a fair bit of investigation to decide whether something's a genuine news article or not. And so the amount of effort to discredit every bit of fake news is such an immense thing that we just can't get to it every day if we're going to be looking on the internet. So several times I found an article and thought, that would be really cool. I'd better make sure, and then find out it's something that's done the rounds every 5 years or so. Like them finding, one of my favourite ones, it's an absolute furphy, is they found, remnants of Egyptian chariots in the bottom of the Red Sea or something. Yeah, I don't know if that's true, so I'd check it up and find out, no, they didn't. And it's something someone made up, 20 years ago, and it keeps circulating every 5 years or so.
At the end of the day, aren't we all idiots with a computer? Aren't we all?
Well,
however, in response,
stupid is as stupid does.
Right.
To quote a wise philosopher.
To respond to what you said about this idea of articles doing the rounds every few years, there's actually something really interesting about what the net has done to our sense of history and memory.
Okay.
I wrote elsewhere on the blog that we are experiencing a kind of collapsing or a contraction of how we experience, time and history.
Right.
So much so that we are losing our sense of history, such that when something crops up after 3 months or 3 years, it comes across as something new.
Right.
Yeah. That's actually something.
We're goldfish.
What's that?
We're literally goldfish swimming around going, look, a rock. Oh, look, a rock.
We've become goldfish. Exactly.
Wow. So this is a social media phenomenon. I noticed that when Facebook throws up your memories, which basically means a post you might be still interested in because some other people liked it back then.
That's right.
You think, gosh, that was a long time ago. And whereas that's not my memory at all. My memories are not associated with looking at Facebook. I actually did stuff in these intervening years. Thank you, Facebook. But there's something kind of I don't know. I'm trying to put my finger on it. Insidious about Facebook deciding what I should remember.
That's right. The internet, and I know we are going into social media later on, but the internet is a very hierarchical space, as I said before, right? Yes, in one level, it has flattened out the discursive space by getting rid of elite gatekeepers, but gatekeepers still remain. The hierarchies are still there. We still need to submit ourselves to a particular hierarchy before we can even start
to play the game,
poking around.
If you get banned from a particular platform, well, let's go to the social media. We've had a friend.
Also, do you know what the internet kills? Memory.
Yes. Also, intellectual capacity, by the way, because they've shown that. We just did it just before we came on there, but they've shown that Googling an answer to a question actually undermines your IQ because there's a power of wondering, as in there's a power. It's like exercising, that you have to exercise something to get good at it. So the fact that I couldn't immediately remember the name of the nun, for example, who was one of the sort of the founding thinkers that led to the internet, I should have just let sit in my mind and struggled to remember it all day, because that exercise of striving to remember actually gets my brain sharper and helps me to think more.
Absolutely.
But if I look straight for the answer, then I become lazy. My brain starts to atrophy in that area.
That's right. And because you know what the internet kills? Memory.
Now we can't edit out either of those instances.
I see what you did there.
Please don't do that all show. Coming back to social media, we have a friend who was on the podcast, and Mark Shea, who had said some things that people didn't like in regards to US politics, and he was beset by a very well-organised and probably what we used to call denial of service kind of attacks, but they manipulated the mechanisms in Facebook because there's an algorithm. Facebook, when people say, I got banned, they imagine that there's some boffin in Facebook headquarters deciding who to ban. It's all algorithm-based. So if enough people get upset, you end up knocking someone off the thing. Now, he's gone through a couple of bans since then, and it's literally that the gatekeepers, the people who really didn't like the fact that he was having some traction with what he was saying, tried to shut him down. No platforming has become something which is possible in this area because we have these blocks and ways of banning people. Is that so different from the past?
It's bringing up a particular kind of paradox about the internet as a space.
Right.
Yeah, because at one level, it is a very democratic space. It opens up the possibilities for various angles on any particular matter. Yet at the same time, precisely because it is such a democratic space, it has also opened the field up for that kind of social media space, particularly, to be taken up by very big corporations, such that only a few elite corporations have come to dominate, dominate the internet space and social media in particular. So, what this sort of goes back to my earlier point about hierarchies, right? At the elite gatekeepers may have disappeared or may have been reformulated. Yet at the same time, the space itself has now become taken over by a very small elite of corporations.
I was watching a video clip of a TV show. I don't usually watch these shows, but it was a panel show, and two of the experts on the panel were bloggers and internet commentators.
Yeah.
When does this qualify you? Like, I've got a blog. That doesn't qualify me to say anything.
No.
Unless you've actually written some quite intelligent things on your blog, which you have.
This is this goes back to this other question about information, the kind of information that we are getting on the internet. It's not simply that we are getting, more information. The quality of the information is also changing.
Right.
The information that we are getting is not only more voluminous, we're not just getting more of it, but the types of, the items of information that we are getting are also starting to contract. Pieces are getting shorter.
Right.
We now think in terms of memes rather than, which are single frame images, rather than full blown essays.
I was just joking before we came in here about TLDR on the internet. The too long didn't read.
Absolutely.
And TLDRs are now appearing on one-page documents. It's a page, for goodness sake. TLDR. So it used to be where there's a wall of text and someone would put a little short version up the top, but TLDR now is for anything longer than a couple of words. It's just
I remember just recently reading an article. I can't remember what article it was, but the TLDR was at the top of the article, and then they had about 2 pages restating the same thing 15 times or so, and it was the same 5 points that was in the TLDR. It's that short.
So
it's changing us in that way. So you were saying about this type of thing we're getting.
That's right. And this is again the result of giving the social media space over to just a few a few corporations. That a lot of the information that then gets fed to us, precisely because it is the result of an algorithm, also comes prefabricated.
It does, and in fact, if I Google on my device, you're going to get a different result from yours because it keeps track of what I've been interested in and spins to you. In fact, it starts to spin me stuff as soon as it figures out I'm male and that I'm of a certain age. It starts to throw certain things at me, and then as it learns my preferences, etc. What freaks me out is when I, on my phone, purchase a particular item. Like I'll buy a microphone for recording this podcast, and then the next instant
it comes up on Facebook.
Pull up Facebook on my PC. And it's throwing ads for microphones on Facebook. And you go, yeah, well, they don't know my buying habits for starters because I'm in and out and gone. So they're too late. But
just become worried when they start putting up ads after you started talking about buying a microphone on the internet.
Yes, that is actually possible now, but it's not terribly legal, as I understand it. But the technology is certainly there. I have a friend who works in something like this industry, and it's possible to do that. It's interesting. He did a series of ads in Town Hall Station where they could access, if you allow your phone to identify him, he accessed that, and or this company did, and then it threw up a picture of you, your own profile picture, and said, it was for an airline, and they said, Peter, we're flying for you, as you walk past the ad, so it talks to you. So, but then people got so freaked out by it. It's invasion of privacy.
This is bringing up something about social media that I'm finding fascinating, and that is the idea that we somehow like being surveyed.
We like being watched.
We like
is that
being
part
watched.
of the prayer thing? Because we like to feel significant?
it's not just that we like to feel significant, but we also like to feel like we are being considered.
Right.
Considered by others. And again, this goes back to the earlier point about the shared experience, right? If it's not just experiences that need to be shared in order to be validated, it's also persons that need to be shared and watched in order to be validated.
I have found some of my friends that actually refuse to participate in internet conversation because of the negative experiences on there. It's created a fear in them, so they refuse to participate in social media and things like that. So in terms of prayer then, is there a trepidation for entering into the challenges of this form of, I guess, contemporary life?
I think so. If there is a fear of social engagement as a result of one's negative encounters on the internet, it is very likely that their attitudes to any kind of social engagement outside of the internet will similarly become affected. Because it's not simply that because I have had one bad experience in one place that I'll be afraid to have another bad experience in another place. It's just that the internet has now become such a pervasive part of our lives. It's so foundational to our lives that the moment we actually have any experience, whether good or bad, on the internet, it actually shapes how we interact in every sphere in real space and time.
Because I think it hurts deeper for many people, since on social media, you can form the idealized version of yourself on there, and for that person to be slammed.
This is my best. This is my best shot.
This is my best self.
This is my best shot at being a person. And if you hate that, then what are my chances in real space and time with imperfect?
Yeah, because I have argued in the past that in history, Catholics have used technology for their faith, for their prayer. Writing books, having drama, cinema, all that. And then here we are with the internet now, and there seems to have been, from my understanding, a lot of Christians saying, no, I won't have it. That's a bad influence on my life. And I think there's a huge, as you're saying, it can be a form of prayer. There's something that we miss in trying to stay away from it.
I'm concerned about the control situation. So two things I'd like to throw at you, Matthew. One is that Google admitted a couple of years ago that the algorithms which control what we see when we Google are so complex now that no one employee of Google actually understands them.
Oh, wow.
Right.
As in, they've gone beyond human ken. So while a particular programmer might understand one particular part of it, they've got machine learning going to such a degree that the Google algorithms are actually perpetuating to such a strong that we don't understand them anymore.
Yes.
That they're beyond us in their complexity. And the second thing I'd say, though, is that the so-called leveler of the internet doesn't seem to work in countries where they shut it down. So, for example, in China, where it's absolutely, there's some leak, but there's a dominant kind of culture, and they can control to some extent, because we still need the devices, we still need the companies which do the radio waves.
Did you say radio waves?
We still do. I mean, Wi-Fi or whatever it is, not the radio waves, but we still need something. To in other words, to spread the web.
Yes,
and even if we're not going to go, I mean, it's easy to point at someone and say, you totalitarian regime, you bad person. Aren't we still, in capitalist countries, pretty much money is running the show? And so whether they can sell you stuff ends up being why everything's on the internet.
To go to your first point about Google's algorithms, what that is saying to me is that the interpretive communities that I spoke about earlier are becoming more depersonalized.
Right.
We are getting to a point where the interpretive police for any interpretive community is not a person. It's actually a mathematical formula.
Right.
So we're letting a mathematical formula overtake a person's capacity to actually act as the arbiter for what's good, true, and beautiful.
Right. So it's becoming dehumanized.
It's becoming depersonalized, certainly.
Right.
And insofar as it becomes depersonalized, it can lay the foundations for dehumanization later on.
Okay.
Especially when the algorithm starts to become the criteria by which you actually determine what it means to be human.
Right.
And this can apply to all sorts of things, particularly when it comes to looking at how images become circulated on the internet as a result of an algorithm.
Right.
With regards to your second point about the sort of contrast that I think is being drawn between the capitalists on the one hand and the totalitarian regime on the other, you got to remember that the big collaborator in the Chinese government's, for instance, crackdown on the internet was Google.
Right.
So there is actually not a contrast between the capitalists on the one hand and the totalitarian on the other. In some circumstances, there's actually a very strong link between one and the other.
Well, it's happening. This is what I was saying recently to a friend. The problem isn't that capitalism is a contrast to sort of any totalitarian regime. If the totalitarian regime happens to have enough money, capitalism will sell itself to it instantly. And in other words, Google is doing this because that buys them a market in a very massive market. Right? And in doing so, it's just a business decision for them.
Yes.
But they quite deliberately, well, what else could they cooperate in? There's all kinds of other manipulation and problems. No doubt we're being manipulated commercially. We can all see it.
No, that's right. That's right.
The question then becomes, how do we operate as Catholics in this environment? So is this isn't, we used to call it the new Wild West when it first came out, because it really was anyone with a modem can connect directly with anyone else with a modem, and technically you still can. Parts of the deep web and also direct internet connections can do it, but most of us connect through intermediaries, and that is a mediated experience. How do we handle this as Catholics? How do we keep self-aware about the changes that are happening, and how do we actually turn it into a positive thing? Because this podcast is broadcast almost completely by the internet.
Yeah.
So
no, that's right. One of the things that I would draw our attention to is the fact that in the first instance, going onto the internet is a communal activity.
Right.
As a you are entering into a communal space.
Yep.
When you log on. Having said that, this communal space is actually not a perfect parallel to the communal space that you would see in real space and time. Because in real space and time, a lot of the people that we would have in our communities are very different people.
Yes.
The community space on the internet is a space that actually breeds conformity.
Right.
It emphasizes conformity.
Because all I can see of you is your idea about this.
That's right.
And therefore, if we're going to hang out, your idea about this is all that matters.
That's right. And so one of the things that needs to be, one of the things that we need to be aware of there is this pressure to conform. And one of the ways that Christians, in particular Catholics, can contribute to life on the internet, and it is a life form that we that we need to take seriously and not avoid, is to actually create the space in such a way that different types of people can inhabit it.
It's interesting you say that, because my best experiences on the internet in terms of community have been where I'm engaged in a community that's doing something else. So, for example, either a gaming community or a community that's just set up to hang out, like Minecraft or Second Life, or where people just do their own thing. And what you think about various political things or religious things is almost irrelevant because you're doing this thing together.
That's right.
And it becomes much more tolerant community, because I might even hang out with people I wouldn't talk to in a pub, and then when I meet them in real life later and find out what they're actually like, I think I would never have even approached you to talk to you, and yet we're really good friends now. But that's because we met not arguing about or talking about a particular idea. We met doing something in a space that is a virtual reality, but it's still a reality.
That's right. And the other thing that you pointed out there with your experience with your friend from the gaming community is the fact that you actually interacted with them outside of the online space. You interacted with them in real space and time, and that interactions in real space and time was the real occasion for friendship. Right? Because you're not just in the online community, sure, you are setting aside certain differences in order to do something together, but insofar as you're doing that, you're not actually putting out the whole complexity of your person on display in the same way that you would in a real offline community, so to speak.
In some respects, but I played cricket with people and they only knew me as a cricket player.
Yeah,
and so they knew my personality on the cricket field.
That's right.
And they'd see me in difficult situations, but that could be similar on an online community.
But I think this is what I was trying to get at earlier with the whole thing of, I don't think we can be we have reasons to fear, but I think it's one of those things that we are really encouraged to as believers in Christ, to not turn away, but learn how to engage in this new culture.
Yep.
And part of that is understanding how to work the space. You're right there, Peter. I think in terms of the two-dimensionality in which you participate in the internet, you don't put all of yourself on there. We have to learn how to use that two-dimensionality to participate in the conversations, as horrible as many of them are. And sometimes, I've been blasted so many times on the internet for saying something, but it's part and parcel of that maturity as well, and showing that we can take it. Hopefully teaching others by doing that, hang on, you should be able to take something as well,
Final comment, Matt, on how we use the space and how we make the space, if you like.
The other thing is to also be aware that the internet is a curated space.
Right.
And we present curated versions of ourselves when we enter that space.
Right.
It is true that sometimes that that curated version of ourselves can be dropped when we are in this anonymous space on the internet. But for the most part, it is actually a manufactured version of yourself when you enter the internet. And what we seek when we want to build human community is not a curated version of ourselves. We want the whole person to be there, to be present before us with all of its complexities and with all of its dimensions. What this means is that as good as online communities are in starting up communal networks, those networks actually need to be brought into real space and time in some way.
Sure.
This will probably have to be the subject of a different discussion, but I think that the church actually has a very big part to play in creating that space in real space and time, whereby a person whom we have met on the internet can be brought out into the light of day, like literally the light of day, and have that person's complexity put before us, and conversely have our own complexities put before that person, so that we can come into deeper communion with one another.
If I can perhaps end with an anecdote which might bring home some of that possibility, is that when I first was considering the deep questions which led me to Catholicism, I was terrified. I didn't want to talk to any Catholics, and my first two experiences of talking to a Catholic were quite bad experiences, so I didn't know what to do. So I did the anonymous thing on the internet, reached out and tried to, in fact, I put a question to almost every Catholic institution in Australia. And the variety of responses is probably for another podcast, but one particular group got back to me, and the interaction I had with them led to, in a very short time, to a phone call, and then in a very short time after that, a personal meeting. It's a meeting which would have been impossible by any other world. I wouldn't have found them. It's such an obscure group that they had. They had a small group of people meeting in Sydney here to discuss the Catholic faith. They happened to have a website. I found it on a search, and then I discovered them. And through that, I had some very, very good conversations and still some very strong friendships from that. And it was an instrumental part. It wasn't the cause, but it was one of the instrumental parts of me becoming Catholic. So there is, if you like, as you say, when there's a connection, when it's a facilitation of personal relationships, it can actually be a strong thing. All right. It's probably a good time to wrap it up. So that's it for this week's podcast. If today's discussion got you thinking, arguing, or wondering at your podcast device, let us know. You can subscribe to our podcast at thiscatholiclife.com.au or on your favourite podcast app, and you can let us know what you'd like us to discuss in the future by dropping us a line at info@thiscatholiclife.com.au, or you can join us on all of these aforesaid nasty social media things, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or Discord. They're all good, and you will find us there. Remember that this is a uniquely Australian Catholic podcast, and we think that's an idea worth getting behind, so tell your friends. It's time of the show for shout-outs. So off you go, Box.
Considering the topic, I've been sharing a lot of food videos and memes on my Facebook. And so this shout out, especially for all those people that seem to follow my page and like my stuff. Thank you.
Fair enough. Matthew.
I would like to give a shout out to two podcasting friends of mine, Joel and David, who produce a really good podcast called The Eucatastrophe. They are a really good resource when it comes to analyzing a whole range of things from a political, a legal, philosophical, and sometimes theological perspective.
Wow.
I highly recommend having a listen to The Eucatastrophe.
Okay. My shout out was similar to Box's, except that I want to shout out to 2 or 3 people who are in constant conversation with me about faith, life, everything. Some of them are atheists, some of them are not, some of them are different Christians, and some of them are Catholics. But the constant back and forth between us and the genuine questions and the thoughtful way they've responded have shaped my thinking over the years, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for them. And yeah, so don't be afraid to ask questions, people. It's a really, really important part of our formation of our own growth. That's all for now. Thank you for listening to This Catholic Life.